Kildavin is a small rural village nestled under the Blackstairs Mountains, right on the border between County Carlow and Wexford. It is located in the historic parish of Barragh, which gave its name to a famous ancient oak woodland here called the Leverrock, La Varach, or half of Barragh. Entry to Barragh Parish from County Wexford is across the attractive Kildavin Bridge, which straddles the River Slaney at the point where it meets its tributary, the Derry. This was a traditional fording point before Young's Bridge was built here in the early 19th century. Cranavon Holy Well is just outside the village. Nearby is the ruins of Barragh Church and its accompanying graveyard. North of the village are two early medieval ring forts, one called Redmond's Ra, the other beside the elegant Sherwood House. Bunclody is the nearest town. Carrickduff was part of Barragh Parish, but it is now very much absorbed into the town. From Carrickduff, the green fields sweep up into the blue foothills of the Blackstairs, cradling a magnificent valley landscape. Bunclody is one of the last places in Ireland to still have a working forge. The fields in the parish often have fine forged iron gates. The deer park was an enclosed walled space where deer were once raised before being released for hunting. An aerial view of Deer Park shows multiple markings of history, and these overlapping layers offer a fitting metaphor for heritage preservation. Kildavin is sited on a staggered crossroads, one road bringing the traveller north towards Tulla, the other heading west to Bagnallstown. It contains two churches, St Paul's Church of Ireland and St Lazarian's Catholic Church, both built in the early 19th century. Just on the edge of the village stands the community-owned Spelman Hall. It was financed in the 1950s by Cardinal Francis Spelman of New York, whose grandmother was born in the parish. He was called Cardinal Moneybags for his fundraising prowess. An iron water pump in the village has been reset in a monument commemorating the 1798 rebellion and the 1916 rising, in both of which local people were active. The village also contains a restored animal weighbridge from 1923, and it offers a visual reminder of the community's agricultural past. St Paul's Church of Ireland was built with a grant of £800 in 1812. Its walls showcase local masonry skills with finely crafted granite ashlar masonry. Observe how superbly the stones are knitted together into a smooth surface with minimal grouting. The nave retains its Gothic Y-tracery windows with small panes. A polygonal apse and vestry in granite ashlar were added in 1880. The church has two silver patens and a chalice with inscriptions from 1815. Many emigrants left this area over the last 2 centuries, and the surviving parochial records are important for genealogical and historical purposes. This country churchyard provides a moving testimony to local families remembering their loved ones. Graveyards link the living and the dead, and Kildavin cherishes its heritage. The dead and their stories are not forgotten here. The well-worn pews stand in silent witness to decades of worship, while commemorative plates ensure that those who served will not be forgotten. A well-thumbed Bible claims pride of place in the church on the ornate lectern. The listing of hymn numbers reminds us that voices have been raised in worship here for over 2 centuries. There are special reminders for the congregation's children and for those who risked their lives in war. Thousands will have passed under the ornate church doorway. A relieving arch was a traditional means to strengthen the structure. The chimney stack reminds us that old churches were typically cold and draughty places with limited options for heating. Rachel Rothwell stands at her family grave, the largest in the adjacent well-tended graveyard, linking the past and the present together and reminding us that many Kildavin families have lived here over many generations. The Catholic Church, St. Lazarian's, was built in 1827. Lazarian is the patron saint of the Diocese of Whelan. Ellen Keogh, grandmother of Cardinal Spellman, is remembered at the rear of the church. Behind the church there is a small building which once stabled the priest's horse when he came from the neighbouring village of Clonegall to say Mass. Captain Charles Byrne, IRA, a victim of the Irish Revolutionary period, is buried in the grounds of the church. The cemetery contains many 19th and 20th century headstones, including a fine wrought iron example and several sturdy granite grave markers. A granite sundial nestles among the gravestones. 2 stained glass windows were donated by a parishioner in 1915. Above the post-Vatican II altar are the Latin words Hic domus Dei est et porti coeli. This is God's house and the gate of heaven. The church has pointed arch windows with wide tracery. It was renovated in 1975 to reflect the liturgical changes brought about by Vatican II. The chapel, as it was always called, was extensively renovated in the 1860s. The roof was replaced, the church ornamented, new seating provided, and a flag floor installed. The parish priest raised funds by auctioning off church seats. The restoration was also supported financially by the local Protestant community. North of the village, in the townland of Crow's Grove, is a site known locally as Redmond's Ra. This is an early medieval ring fort, an ancient circular farm enclosed by an earthen bank. It measures almost 30 metres in diameter, and the interior is covered in trees and bushes. Ring forts typically date from between the 7th and 10th centuries AD, and were most likely the homes of wealthy cattle farmers. Kildavin Bridge, locally called Young's Bridge, is an elegant 6-arch rubble-stone built bridge that links Carlow and Wexford counties by crossing the River Slaney between the townlands of Kildavin and Ballyshonock. It dates from around 1800. The Youngs were a family who lived in the fine granite farmhouse that still stands beside the bridge.
I'm Luke Hayden. We're standing here at the bridge in Kildavin, which was known years ago as Young's Bridge or the New Bridge. There was a bridge prior to this one here. This bridge was built in 1800, and the drawings were done by a man by the name of Charles Duroch, who lived over the road here, about 2 miles over the road in Johnstown. He was a physician, a stonemason, a cabinet maker, and he was a surveyor of land. And he was very sought after in the area at the time because he had some qualifications, well, I won't say qualifications, he had very little education, but he was a man that could do anything. And that's what we know about this bridge.
The bridge replaced 2 earlier fords adjoining the meeting of the Slaney and Derry rivers. The place name Kildavin is a derivation of the Irish Kildavin, the Church of Davin.
So this is the area in Kildavin known as Gattin-Yor, a reminder that the Irish language would have survived here well up into the 19th century. And Gattin-Yor meant the gate of tears, or the gap of tears. And the reason for that was because in the old days, when people emigrated from here, there was a ford. This is before the Kildavin Bridge was built, which we're right beside. Before that, people had to come from Clonegall down the Banks Lane. They would then cross on a ford here, and then there's a lane which goes up and over Drumderry and drops down on the other side of the Slaney. You can actually still see the old road there as well. And the old road to Enniscorthy used to run on the east side of the river, not on the west side where it is now. So the whole road system was very, very different. But this was the spot where the emigrants would be have to turn and leave the view of the wonderful valley of Kildavin, Clonegall, the area that they'd kind of grown up in, where they had to kind of make what I always think of as that terrible turn, where they had to kind of leave their loved ones, leave their parents, knowing in a way that it was a kind of a living death, that they would never see their parents again, never see their childhood friends, maybe never see their sweethearts again, and they had to turn and walk, trudge, you know, down to Wexford Town, or down to New Ross on foot, and you know, turning that turn which happened here, that must have been awful for the families and for the people themselves to kind of understand that you're moving into a completely different environment and a different world. In the old days, they had a thing called the American Wake, which basically was when somebody was going to emigrate, the night before there would be a kind of party or a wake or a saying of farewells. And it was really a living death. It was like what you'd have at a funeral, because people knew they would never see that person again. 1 out of 2 people on the island of Ireland have emigrated since 1800. And many thousands of people would have left this beautiful valley as well and had to find a new way to make a life in Canada, in the USA, in Australia, all over the world. Ireland could be hard on people, and there was a lot of people who had to leave this magnificent valley here of the Slaney and the Derry and seek a new world. And in a way, that memory of the tears and the heartbreak, that's part of Ireland as well. In Ireland, we always talk about our sense of place, and we're all, like myself, from just half a mile up the road here, you know, very proud of and very aware of being from Clonegall or Kildavin or Johnstown, the townland we're in. But at the same time too, that sense of place, the reason why it's so strong is because we were also surrounded by displacement, that so many people had to leave, that it was actually hard to stay in your own place. My mother, who had 12 children, the one thing I ever heard her say that sounded even remotely boastful, she was the least boastful person on the planet Earth, but she said, none of my children emigrated. And it was almost an achievement to keep a family together, that somebody didn't have to emigrate from a large family like ours. So an amazing kind of a thing. And then just here, you know, this stone, this site here is a reminder to us that so many people from Clonegall, from Kildavin, from these beautiful foothills of the Blackstairs have had to make that huge transition in their life to leave, but would always carry with them, because the lightest thing you can carry are memories. Had to carry with them their memories of growing up here. And there's so many people from this parish and this community who have lived their lives carrying memories, happy memories, maybe sad memories too, of having to leave, but memories of growing up in this place here, which I think of as, and I have travelled a lot of the world, I think of this as one of the most beautiful places that anybody could be lucky enough to be born in. But there's a pain there as well, there's tears there as well, there's sadness there as well, and an understanding of history is that history makes you, but history can also break you, and it must have broken many people's hearts at this particular spot here back in the day.
Bridges were crucial to the commercial and social life of the community. Kilcarry Bridge crosses the Slaney between the townlands of Cran and Kilcarry. This is a 5-arch, humpback, rubble-built bridge. Francis Doyle, whose family lived right alongside the Slaney, speaks of its significance.
In an ordnance survey done, they say it could possibly have been the first bridge built across the Slaney. And that was probably in 1040, 1050. And it would have been built, of course, by the locals, who were the landowners, the farmers, or people who lived nearby, all of the neighbours getting together to do something about connecting one community with another. They say there were 3 or 4 arches built then, which is hard to believe. But anyway, it survived, and the bridges we know today was probably done maybe in the 1800s. And it now has 3 arches, 3 big arches and 2 small ones. That during the War of Independence a lot of damage was done to some of the bridges around the whole country, but it seems as if this one here survived anyway, which was a great feat. Now, there is more to the bridge than the physical thing. It is very much a cultural, there's a lot of cultural heritage involved with Kilcarry Bridge here today. And I would like to emphasise that in the 1960s, this place was like a community. It was like a little village in itself, because everybody, all of the neighbours and all of the locals gathered here together to play all of the GA games that were going at that time, hurling, football, and then the women, of course, had their camogie. I even played here myself as well. But it was a great opportunity for people to come together here, and a lot of the social life of the area revolved around here. It was incredible that young and old came from all over Clonegall, Kildavin to play the matches here and to meet up, and stayed quite late at night as well for the chat and for all of the social side of life at that time. It was very simple, but we loved it. And it was like a little village in itself, as I said, which is a pity now that that is all gone. On the other side of the bridge over here, we have what we call the house called the mill house. Obviously there was a mill there, woolen mill there years and years ago as well.
The big house holds a significant place in the social, cultural and historical fabric of Ireland. These houses were typically the residences of the Anglo-Irish Protestant ascendancy. As the land passed into the ownership of the previous tenants, many were abandoned. Sherwood Park House is exceptionally well maintained by its current owners, the Owens family. The Palladian house, with its perfect symmetry, is almost 3 centuries old, as it was built in 1730. Sherwood Park was connected with the Keogh estate, who controlled almost 2,000 acres in the area in the famine period. This house showcases local craftsmanship. Traditional stone walls and wrought iron gates are in evidence. Paddy Owens talks about the original owner.
The house was built between 1730 and 1750. It was completed in 1750, and it was built by people by the name of, they were Baileys. And they were tapestry makers and interior designers from Capel Street in Dublin. And they got the contract for refurbishing the Bank of Ireland, as it now was the House of Lords then, and they also got the contract for commissioning a couple of famous tapestries that are in there. But the whole thing went haywire, and they went to sort of broke with. And this fella came down here, and he married a girl with 450 pounds at the time, and that was enough to build Sherwood, and he was able to lease, 1,200 acres or something around. So that was the start of it, and they built these gates and the house up further, yeah. So that's sort of the history of Sherwood.
In a world where the horse ruled in tillage areas like Kildavin, the blacksmith was a hugely valued craftsman. Kildavin had several forges, and there are still many forge-made gates on local farms. As warm places in a cold climate, forges were also vibrant social centres, especially in the dark winter months.
I'd just like to talk to you a bit about the gates here at Ballin Valley Farm. These gates were here when the first maps of the area were made in 1840, and it's connected to both this is Ballin Valley House is behind you there, and Cranavon Well is down below, and the house is supposed to be connected to, like this was a part of the families or the landlord at the time. The gates are very strong steel, they're all forged, and the pattern that's on the gates is typical of Carlow. You will see this design on several farms around Carlow. As to the actual date of when they were made, but they're definitely pushing the 200 years old plus, you know. So they're very strong gates. When you clean them off to paint them or anything like that, there's no rust. You can see where it was redone here, and the steel, modern steel, is not near as good as the way they forged it in the past. So hopefully it'll last another 200 years.
The craft of forging or smithing can be observed and learned in nearby Bunclody.
So you're very welcome here to Nolan's Forge on Foundry Lane, Bunclody. I'm Liam Kelly, and I was reared just there, around the corner. So when I was going to school here in the late 60s, this was a very busy spot. On a wet day, there'd be asses, horses, ginnets, all tied out there. Farmers would be all in here smoking, telling lies. And on the wet day, then someone would be gone on the beer, and the horses would be here for the next day. So it's great to see it, and great to have the likes of Darren here, who has a great interest in blacksmithing, showing the trade, because there's not many left now that are able to show it off. He also had courses here for first-time blacksmiths and teaching people the trade. So it's brilliant to see the trade go on. Brilliant to see the work going on in the anvil. It's like music to the ears when you're used to it when you're young lad.
So this is the original anvil for the forge when Martin Nolan was here. There were 6 generations of the Nolan family forged here, going back to the 1700s. And this is also the original heart, where the fire for the fire. And this is the bellows. This bellows is not original to the forge, but it came from another forge just up the street. So this is called the binding stone, where the cartwheels were assembled on this stone. And the cartwheel comprised of 3 different types of timber. So you had elm in the centre, you have oak on the outside, and the spokes were made from ash. And then the metal band, or the tyre, was made from wrought iron. And the process for doing the timber parts were made by a wheelwright, and then the blacksmith would have put the tyre onto it. And the process of putting on the tyre would have meant lighting another fire here beside the binding stone and heating up the metal so it expanded, and then they put it on, hammered it down onto the timber wheel and cooled it down, and when it cooled down it pulled all the timber tight together. Yeah, we're heating up the metal here now, and we'll have a go at punching a hole in it. Just going to tidy up the hole a bit here now. At joining 2 pieces of metal together with a rivet, then so I need to make a hole now in the other end of this first. So I have rivets here in a little metal tub here, and I'm going to put that into the fire to redden them. These are called rivet sets, or a rivet header.
The historic parish of Barragh stretches all the way to the Wexford border and high into the Blackstairs Mountains. The townlands of Carrickduff, Clonmullen, Barnahask and Kilbranish all nestle in the embrace of this striking mountain range. The Sliocht Ort Thee of the Kavanaghs were based at Clonmullen Castle, and their most prominent leader was Donal Spaniach. Donal gained his name after spending 4 years in Spain on a military expedition. On returning to Ireland, he navigated a treacherous, bloody world with consummate flexibility and cunning, and managed to die peacefully in his bed. At the start of the 9 Years' War in 1593, Donal and Fiach Mac Hugh Byrne sided with A. O'Neill, or Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, in his valiant fight against English colonialism in Ireland. Donal Spaniach Mac Murchada Kevanach died in 1632, the last Gaelic king of Leinster, in a line that stretched back a millennium. His son, Murchada, or Morgan Kavanagh, continued to reside at Clonmullen Castle. In 1641, he was a principal leader in County Wexford in the Great Rebellion. He was killed leading his men at the Battle of Ballinvega near New Ross in March 1643. The family were eventually forced off their ancestral Clonmullen and into continental exile. The gold crown of the Kavanagh kings was still with a descendant in Nantes in France in the late 18th century. Jim Rothwell, a Barnahask native, has detailed knowledge of the Kavanagh clan. Jim also has the traditional memory of hedge schools and ancient graveyards, which he shares with his friend Dan Murphy.
Well, if you want to talk about our people, they moved from Carrickduff, they had a small farm in Carrickduff first, and they moved up here in 1780.
Yeah.
And I was going to tell you about Barragh Church. I heard that some of our ancestors went to that church in Barragh before it was demolished or burnt down or whatever happened. They couldn't have went from here to Barragh. They probably went from Carrickduff. Because the church in Bunclody was built in 1775 and the town was built between 1725 and 1775. The town of Newtownbarry, which became Bunclody.
Yeah.
Now I'll move up to Clonmullen from the town. And there was a castle in Clonmullen, the Kavanagh Castle. And the Kavanaghs were a clan, a whole big clan of Kavanaghs. They had castles in Clonmullen, Carrickduff, Clohamon, Ranagir at the other side of the mountain, and there was also Kavanaghs in Burris House, which I don't know were related or not, the ones in Burris House. The history of the Kavanaghs in Clonmullen, they were rebels, always rebels against the British Crown. And they were such a torment to the British that King Richard II of England came over to Ireland to deal with all these rebels all around the whole country, including the Kavanaghs. And King Richard II reigned between 1377 and 1397. And it's reported that he came out across the mountain from the other side of the mountain after dealing with the rebels out there to deal with the rebels in Clonmullen. Now, I'm only going by what I have read.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll start again with the Kavanaghs in Clonmullen. There was one Kavanagh, and he was known as Spaniard Kavanagh because he went to Spain and fought with the Spanish armies somewhere at that time. There was another Kavanagh, and he was known as Sir Morgan Kavanagh. Whoever was on the throne of England knighted him and gave him a pension to see would there be any peace. They thought they'd get a better him that way. I even heard the pension they gave, and it was £5, which was an awful lot of money at that time. I think it was £5 a month, which was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, there was a girl in the castle, and she was known as Eileen Aroon. And Eileen Aroon fell in love with a minstrel or a bard who used to travel the countries at that time, these travelling minstrels.
Yeah.
She fell in love with this minstrel and they arranged a marriage for her. And I forget the name of the man that they arranged the marriage for. But the night before the wedding, the minstrel came back and played a tune outside of the castle in Clonmullen. And she heard it. And she got out through a window and she went away with her minstrel boyfriend, lover.
Yeah.
That's all I know about her, except that she's buried in the old graveyard in Kilmichael. And I, after looking for it for a long time, I found it. Yeah. Now, the castle in Clonmullen was demolished. And they say that Cromwell demolished it. But I don't believe that. Because the last of the Cromwells, the last of the Kavanaghs fought at the Battle of the Boyne, which was in 1690.
Yeah.
And Cromwell was here in 1649. So I don't believe he demolished the castle in Clonmullen then.
Mm.
But the last of the Kavanaghs that fought at the Battle of the Boyne, the ones that survived, they were on the wrong side for a start, they were with King James.
Yeah.
The last of them immigrated to Spain and never ever came back. The castle in Clonmullen was pulled down and the stones were used to build the houses in Clonmullen Street. It was a street of farmhouses, 7 houses, they called it a street.
Yeah.
The stones were used to build them houses. And Church Road in Newtown Barry.
Yeah.
That's where, and they say the vault, or cellars, or whatever you call them, are still underground there, that were filled in.
Yeah, in Clonmullen, yeah.
Now, we'll move up to Barnahask. The school in Barnahask was built in 1825, and it was used as a school and a church for many years. But before it was ever built, there was an outdoor school, or a head school, whichever you like. And they said that all they had for a desk was an ass's card turned on its side. And the teacher stood behind the ass's card.
Yeah.
And there were 7 families of Rothwells in Barnahask when they moved in, after moving in, when they spread out. And now there's only 2 in Barnahask.
Yeah.
And there was 3 up in Kilbranish. And there's no Rothwell in Kilbranish now. Now, if you like, we'll move up to Kilbranish. And up in Kilbranish, Kill is a church.
Yeah.
And they said there was a church in Kilbranish and a graveyard. I know where the graveyard is. It's known as the Relic. It's on the map as a relic.
Yeah.
And there's little old headstones there with no name on any of them. And one day I asked Jacob Rothwell, who owned that farm, how old is that graveyard? And Jacob said he always heard and went back to the time of the Druids.
The townlands of Deer Park Old and Deer Park New lie above the village of Kildavin in the foothills of the Black Stairs. Its rugged landscape featuring old dry stone walls that once offered a safe enclosure for deer. The Ordnance Survey maps indicate that ancient settlement took place on the site. Jim Fitzharris and his son Jason now occupy this venerable and multi-phase landscape. As reliable heritage keepers, they have extensively researched its history.
The farm in the Middle Age for Irish were mainly cattle farmers. There were no sheep, and they were around the lowlands, which are around I call them communes. And in the summertime, then they come up onto the hills here, and they cultivate small patches, and they live in little bohons. There's an example in the neighbouring hill. That's why I was trying to get you up to it. Still remnant of it, which was farmed up until the 1850s, and back that time there was up to 45 families lived up here. I mean up here, long under us here, none of the houses were up here, they're from there down. 45 houses and 45 families. And between one thing and another, by the time the famine came, there were only 4 left. And you can see the remnants in the landscape there where they were cultivated extensively. And all that was abandoned. Now the landlord then brought in sheep, because the tenants were gone, so there was nobody cultivating land. So the landlord then started bringing in sheep and bringing in tenants to tend the sheep. So we became sheep farmers then. That was deer. We reckon, from the records I can find, around the 1300s, the first deer parks were established in Ireland. There were one in Carlow, and this was the second one after the Carlow one in this part of the country. And it's in 2 deer parks, 2 different sizes, and 2 different townslands. There's Deer Park Old, Deer Park New, and underneath then was a place called the Paddocks, which Rot was living, and that's where they used to corral the deer. And the deer were kept for food, obviously to make money out of them, and primarily for hunting. But I have correspondence between the Earl of Ormond and Nuttall there and Kavanagh, inviting them up here to hunt deer. The deer at that time, that was Ireland was wooded, something like you're looking there behind you, except they were all hardwood. And the only remnants of that hardwood forest left is below, under us here in Haldare's estate. Some of you are familiar with, that's oak. It was all in oak wood. And the whole country was covered in oak wood, so it was ideal for deer and deer population. The English has expanded. They started using Irish timber then for shipbuilding and for a lot of buildings. And it brought we went from about 80% timber to less than 10% timber in the country. And that was all the oak, all that went to England. And there was an old system, now they didn't practice it here, where they call it a 21-year lease. Say a piece of ground like this, the landlord would give a young couple a lease of 21 years on an acre or 2 of ground, on condition that he reclaimed it. Paid no rent. That's for 7 years he paid no rent. The next 7 years they paid half rent. The third 7 years they paid full rent. So that's about it. That land you're looking at had been abandoned, and it had gone into a wilderness, and it was mainly covered with bracken. So we attempted, that's my son behind me there working on it, to turn this section of it into a high nature value plot of land. The deer park beside us is not suitable, this is the only one that's suitable. So that's what an exercise we're at, and putting sheep on it, along with cutting back the bracken. Yeah, the 1600s, they finished the development of the deer parks and started building the walls. Now the walls were built in stages. You started with a dike at one side and a little bun ditch at the other side, and cross members on top of it. That was your fence. And as numbers grew and people became available, they kept building it up. So if you look at, I can walk over to one there, I can show you. It's a 10-foot wall, and you start at the bottom with pure clay and dirt. Then it's a mixture of stones and clay, and then when you get up to the last couple of feet, it's all stone. Lovely built walls, they're built it. That's the angle of them facing in, 4 foot wide, 6 to 10 foot high. I had the pleasure of repairing one of them for Loretsky, and that's the way they're built. Beautifully built walls. They're standing there, they're standing since 1300s. The 2 deer parks are divided by a long linear wall from top to bottom, and it goes from the boundary at the very top It goes actually right down to Bunagora. But the lower end of it now would be only bits and pieces of it left because it's farmed and renovated and reclaimed. Whereas up here it's not touched, bar, by cutting a few forests. So from that ditch down, what you would call farmland. And from that up then, it's, now how it works is the farmers got leases on that land. And this land then up here was, they got what they call grazing rights. And that's a different type of a lease where you're only allowed to graze sheep in it for so many months of the year. They'd be the same farmers that were farming down there, and it's divided up between them. Well, the dividing wall is what I call an internal wall. And it was built to divide the two communities. Now, if you look at it on the ground, one side of it, the wall is only 4 foot high. The other side of it is 10 foot high, because it was designed to block the deer going one direction. And that's still standing there today. We can go over and show you one that's opened, just over the way there. That's the dividing wall from top to bottom. So most deer parks were surrounded by stone walls, invariably stone walls, because the old timber fence didn't last. They had to keep replacing, and then the oak was used elsewhere. So, and obviously, if you talk about a wall, there's 9 kilometres of walls around it. So you're talking about 4 foot high, you're talking about up to 10 foot high, 6 to 10 foot high. 6 foot is the minimum to keep deer from jumping it. 4 foot wide, all dug by hand. So all that stone had to be carried off the hill and to build those. Now what they earned that, I have no idea, no idea. There was a coach road went through it, one end of it, and it's still somewhat left today, and that was shut in 1775. And it's a coach road between Deer Park and the Glebe, which was the residence for the minister down underneath. So that coach road is shut down. Along here you'll see there's we call them mass pats, because behind us over the hill is a Protestant school, or Church of Ireland school. And in front of us is the Church of Ireland church. So they used to go to the church this way, and from Kildavin in that area go back that way to the school, and the two communities used to mix. And they'll crisscross the hills here, and the pats are still there actually, where they crisscross. One famous family is worth mentioning, if you're interested in it. Just down to over my shoulder there lives the Grennan family, who were master stonemasons back in the 1700s. And actually the floor in either Kildavin or Clonegall Church, they did the floor, because this is a very good quality granite. Now it's all farmed over and gone over at this stage, and that made the Carlow stone. You often heard of the Carlow Pier or the Troch, all them Carlow, but there is a couple left. We're out here now, we're at the internal boundary wall between the two deer parks. And as you can see, it's about 6 foot high. But at the other side, if you go to the other side, it's only 4 foot high. So that was stopping the deer from going that direction, where it would come this direction. That's the purpose of the exercise. And a stone, you can see the stone there, moss covered. The stone faced all the way. Now the very above it would be clay and sods.
Behind us then was a quarry, behind the camera is a quarry where lots of stones were taken for building of houses and barns and things, and this is an example of one stone that they dug out. They started to break it, obviously then abandoned it, and they left it behind then in that stone wall. And that wall is at least 200 years old because it's on the first OSI map, so it gives you an indication of how old that rock is. Okay, yeah, so this rock was obviously taken out of the quarry here, which is to my left. And they started cutting it, and then obviously for whatever reason they abandoned it. Maybe it wasn't good enough, and they just left it them in part of that stone wall. And that wall there was on the OSI map from 200 years ago, so it's at least that old, if possibly older.
Granite boulder, which has been punch marked for splitting, for alternative use. The punch holes are put in it, and timber was wedged into it then, and the timber was wet. Timber expanded. And that's how they make the Carlow stone, slowly like that. And that's split one down there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, probably another one in there.
The landscape around Kildavin wears and bears the scars of its history that shape our cultural and environmental legacy. This legacy defines our identity as a community, reminding us that we live in places shaped by our ancestors and prompting us to be good custodians of our environment. Kildavin is committed in strong and tangible ways to preserving our unique heritage. Heritage is the living memory of our people, reflecting our history, our values, and our continuity as a community. Children are our future, and they in turn will stitch their own stories into our inherited cultural tapestry. The willingness of the Kildavin community to share their individual stories builds into a satisfying picture of the wider stories of this area. Custodians of significant sites have never hesitated in supporting their preservation. Modern technology is helping us in our preservation efforts. Digital archiving, like this film, allow us to transmit our heritage for future generations. We now turn to two of our most significant heritage sites, Cranavon, Holy Well, and Barragh Church, the centre of our ancient parish. Cranavon, Holy Well, is a lovingly restored site just outside the village. With the great goodwill of its owners, the Murphy family, it has become a significant local amenity. By tradition, the site is linked to the 5th century St. Finian and is likely formed part of a larger monastic community founded by him at Barragh. Cranavon's coffin-shaped well is its most distinctive feature. There is more to be unravelled, as the enigmatic markings on some of its stones suggest. Local man Kevin Whelan talks about its place in the history and culture of the community.
So this is Cranavon Holy Well, just a mile or so out of Kildavin. And this has been magnificently restored by the local community in recent years, including bringing one of the old stones from the chapel in Kildavin. When the chapel was renovated, all the old granite stones were taken out, and this one was recovered from the bank of Spellman Park and put back in here. And it's now a very beautiful Holy Well site. In spring, when it's festooned in daffodils, I think of it as one of the most charming and beautiful of the 3,000 holy wells or so that there are in Ireland. So the local community in Kildavin deserves huge respect for what they've done here. This is one of the great restoration projects that I've seen across Ireland. Holy wells, of course, were part of what we might call vernacular religion, something that existed alongside, but in some respects outside the official or institutional church. And holy wells were places that people came when they needed reassurance, where you could say a prayer if somebody was sick, where maybe you could take the holy water or bless yourself with it if you were suffering from an illness or anything of that kind. And there was a lot of kind of, what would I say, a lot of spirituality in them. In the holy wells, you were close to nature, you were in a beautiful setting, as here in Cranavon. You were also in some respects close to what you would think of as help, or help from a supernatural or from the Christian kind of world. And these places were hugely important, especially when the Catholic Church in Ireland was persecuted And when it wasn't so easy to practice formal religion, these places then filled in the gap for that. They were a form of vernacular religion which came from the grassroots, which came from the people themselves, rather than from a kind of an institutional or top-down church. And because of that, they struck very deep roots in the community. And it's a brilliant thing that in the parish of Clonegall, Kildavin, there is now such a magnificently restored holy well as Cranavon.
Pat Byrne talks about his memories linked to the site in the company of some of the families of the founding committee members.
As a young lad growing up, I used to visit Cranavon regularly. I used to walk across the fields here, as it's only a short distance from our house. Access to the site was easy, as parts of the boundary ditch were in very poor condition. The site itself was overgrown and run down. But luckily, the holy well was in very good condition and kept well intact. In 1998, there was a committee formed here with a view to the restoration of Cranavon.
Pat is listened to intently by Carmel Gibson, Ned Murphy, Michael and Fiona Murphy, and Breed St. Ledger, representatives of the far-seeing families of those who sat on the first Restoration Committee and who preserved Cranavon Holy Well for others to appreciate now.
And through the hard work of this committee, their vision and commitment over a long period of time, Cranavon was restored to its heritage values. And that's what makes Cranavon what it is today. The site is located on the lands of the Murphy family, Van Valley. And the entrance to the site is up a short laneway, which gives access to two small enclosures, which the two dry stone holy wells are located. Also on the site, there's a coffin-shaped pit well here just in front of us, where history tells us that coffins were regularly dipped in this well on their way before burial in nearby Barragh Church graveyard. Cranavon well was associated with St. Finian, and St. Finian came from Michael. And came from Michael. And there's also a stone on the site with the impressions of a footprints which are believed to be of St. Finian. Also, like most holy wells, they're associated with cures, and Cranavon is for sore eyes and aches and pains of the limb. And the month of May is the month that's most associated with Cranavon. Cranavon is a well-kept, maintained site which the local people are very proud of. But it is also a heritage site, not alone for the local community, but for the neighbouring counties, surrounding counties, Carlow and further afield, where people regularly visit.
Early church sites can be found at Barragh, Kilbranish and Kildavin. Barragh has the most impressive remains as it contains the footprint of a medieval church and a truly ancient graveyard. Hidden among the lush greenery of Barragh graveyard lie grave markers. We know of 3 inhabitants of the cemetery: Margaret Neal, née Dempsey, who died in February 1727, and 2 priests, Father Brian Quirk and Father Thomas Dempsey. The Kildavin and Clonegall area was once called Farn Inail, so it is intriguing to find that the oldest known gravestone in our parish commemorates an O'Neill. And the O'Neills are still a prominent family in Kildavin, not least in its sporting history. This irregular shaped graveyard, adjacent to the ruins of Barragh Church, is entered through a traditional wrought iron gate on granite piers. Tradition tells us that Barragh Church was founded by St. Finian of neighbouring Moishel in the 6th century. It was in existence in the early 13th century when the church and its tithes were granted to the Augustine Abbey of St. Thomas in Dublin, just off modern Thomas Street. The ruins form a long, narrow structure that originally measured 25 metres in length by 5 metres in width. It is constructed of irregular field stones bonded with lime mortar.
I'm PJ Tracy, and my uncle, Tom Curry, was the owner of this land here, and he left it to me when he died. And I suppose when I was a small chap, he used to bring me over here, and I used to be walking around with him and that, and he told me stories about there was over there in the bog, there was a big wet patch, a shake, and it was in my younger days it was fenced all around with barbed wire to keep stock from going into it. There was supposed to be no end to it, and the chalice and gate of the tabernacle was supposed to be buried, turned into this when the church was turned.
So it was a kind of a swamp or a...
Swamp, yes, a swamp, yes, and there was supposed to be no end to it. And this wire was put around it to keep stock out, and if you, for about 15-20 yards, I suppose, if you jumped here, you'd see alders moving over there.
Yeah, with that weight.
That weight, like, you know, shaking.
Yeah.
And we're always warned never to go in there. And sure, people back years ago, they seemingly come to get this treasure, or thought they were going to get it out of this swamp, and that. And there was horses' cars and asses' cars was that time up there on the top road to tie him up there, and when they come down here to work, the horses would go mad. When they go up above, everything would be okay. And it was strange. They had to leave it so anyway, like that they got nowhere with their digging.
Right.
A possible enclosing ditch is visible to the north of the church. It takes the form of a line of wet, boggy ground that demarcates a boundary line associated with the church. The church was destroyed by Cromwell, according to a vivid piece of folklore which still exists in the local community around the building's demise. When the priest saw the Cromwellians, he rushed from the church, taking the gold sanctuary plate and the chalice with him. He threw them in a bog hole about 100 yards away from the church. He had only just thrown them away when the soldiers came upon him and killed him. They then went back and burned the church. The local belief is that the plate and chalice are still buried in the bog, but that anyone sacrilegious enough to search for them will meet a bad end. We are blessed as a community to live in such an historic landscape, in a valley as vividly beautiful as any that Ireland has to offer.